wonderful to be preaching before you once more this morning, and I'm glad to see so many faces here. Fortunately, we've had both passages read to us this morning by Michael and by Graham, respectively, and this has given us the broader context of this morning's passage, or this morning's verse in particular, which is, of course, John 8:32, which is, "The truth shall set you free." And this is, of course, a most well-known saying, especially in the English language. It's certainly an idiom that has become renowned across the Anglosphere for hundreds of years now. You can find this phrase adorning university shields and mottos. You can find it on library archways. You can find it, of course, it's the motto of many institutions around the world. Because, of course, it speaks to something so intimate to the human experience. It speaks to something so ethereal, namely, the truth shall set you free. Of course, then it's important to consider for us this morning, what exactly does this mean? Not just in terms of the language of how it is actually written there for us, but also for the context, or as it is found in the context of John, and particularly in John chapter 8, in those verses from 21 through to 38, within which we find it. So this morning we'll be examining history, we'll be examining language, we'll be examining philosophy, and of course the deep theology of this passage on the whole, and these words in particular. For a context, to familiarise ourselves with the passage and then to be able to dive further into the meaning of this particular phrase, where we find ourselves in John is, of course, as we saw, with Jesus speaking before a number of Jewish followers. X amount of that following group were, of course, believers, but of course there were many around him who were not, as is evidenced by the conversation. In the first sort of half, so to speak, of this particular passage, we see that Jesus is conversing with them regarding who he is. We see a number of very interesting components that come up in those first few verses from 21 onward. He begins, of course, by saying, as we saw, that I am going away and you will seek me, but you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. So the Jews said to themselves, will he kill himself, since he says, where I am going, you cannot come? And so immediately we're starting to see a pattern that then kind of unfolds in terms of the audience in front of whom Jesus is speaking. Namely, that there is a big disconnect, there is a dissonance between what Jesus is truly communicating to the people versus what they're actually comprehending and understanding. Of course, this is not an unfamiliar occurrence or theme with regards to Jesus' sermons and many talkings with the people around him. Of course, many people misinterpreted and didn't quite understand at all what he was saying in many fronts. But indeed, here we see this pattern beginning to unfold. And it has to do primarily and first and foremost with the actual views and ideology of those whom Jesus is speaking to. And this will become evident as we continue forward. Jesus' response to them is to say that you are from below and I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. Of course, the response to him is what? Who are you? Now, by this point, we are, if my chronology correct, we are roughly in the late second year, perhaps early third year, final year of Jesus' ministry, to my memory. So by this point, we have heard that, or we have seen rather, that Jesus has talked to tens of thousands of people. There would be very few people in the region of Judea, and indeed almost across the whole Near East, who don't know who Jesus is, at least at a base level by now, namely that he is a flamboyant preacher from that dirty backwater of Nazareth. That is at least the base understanding of what people think or hear about Jesus. But nevertheless, the audience to whom Jesus is speaking would of course heard, and in some of their cases may even have seen, the many different things that he had said about himself. His claims to divinity, his claims to be sent of the Father. And of course, by now he's already spoken the famous words in John chapter 6, for example, regarding him being sent of the Father, and so on and so forth. And indeed here there's this dissonance that is continuing to occur. It's within this context that we find, when you then fast forward to verse 32, Jesus saying the words, that then you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. More broadly from 31 it says, So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed, so in this case speaking particularly to this group of the larger group who had already believed, if you abide in my word, and you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So when we see this context of Jesus speaking about who he is, saying that I am from above, you are from below, I am sent of the Father, and indeed he throws a rather clever, sarcastic, and indeed poignant sort of insult there at the end in verse 38, saying that, of course, that I speak of what I was seeing from my Father, and you do what you've heard from your father, lowercase f, referring in sleight of hand way to their father, the devil. And indeed, that's a fascinating thing for Jesus to say that, because of course he says it elsewhere, as we know, calling those in the temple a den of vipers and so on and so forth. It's fascinating that he's using that language and demonstrating this dichotomy, so between himself and this Jewish audience in front of whom he is speaking. Especially given the fact that we know that these are, especially in the language of the time, the chosen people of God. These are the people of Israel. These are the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. These are the chosen ones, God's people. And yet here we have Jesus, as has been the case in other cases, by other examples in the New Testament, saying that you're of your father the devil, that you are different from me, I am from above, you are from below. Now why is this the case? Because it informs our understanding of a statement like the truth shall set you free. Indeed, in that early part, much of what he's talking about here is regarding this enslavement and slavery. Now, of course, the Jews respond earlier on in that passage that we're not slaves, we've never been slaves, we're the seed of Abraham, we're the sons of Abraham. Now, of course, it's unlikely that they're trying to put forward the idea that they've never ever been physically or politically enslaved, because of course that would be absurd. The Jews, as we know, throughout most of their history were enslaved by just about any empire that ever came near them. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Syrians round two, and the Romans once more. So it's highly unlikely that they were talking about this physical or political enslavement. Rather, it's more probably a reference to an enslavement in terms of their connection to God, or rather it's an enslavement from a religious component. Of course, we may recall that even in the Babylonian captivity, Daniel and a number of the others continued to be faithful toward God. And there was this sense that no matter who had come along, no matter what empire and lords might seem to conquer the region of Judea and indeed the Jewish people, they nevertheless continued to persevere. The fact that the Jewish people were even around at this time, having been under the rule and the tyranny of no less than 5 different empires by this point, is a testament to their ability to survive. And we see that even fast forwarding 2,000 years into our time, where in many cases the Jews have been under the hand and under the iron fist of so many different empires and nations around the world, and they have moved in diaspora to a number of different safe havens around the world. But yet Jesus still speaks to their enslavement, to their bondage. And of course, as we saw, their retort was that we've ever been slaves. But yet Jesus says, oh yes, you are. And so what exactly is he pointing to? What exactly is he trying to communicate? Well, indeed, he is talking about not an enslavement to tyrannical government, nor is he talking about an enslavement to human masters. But rather he's talking about an enslavement of a far more pervasive and nefarious kind. An enslavement of the mind, and on a deeper level of the will, to sin, into rebellion, to death, to hell. That is the enslavement of which he is talking about. Something which does not necessarily manifest itself in the political or societal sphere around them, but rather encapsulates and holds in bondage their very hearts and minds. This is evident even in the Gospels itself, with so many of the things that Jesus speaks against. The ways in which the people have strayed from the teachings of the Tanakh and had moved into the machinations of the priests and the rabbis and the Talmudic influence that had come out of Babylon 400 years earlier, and so on and so forth. Many traditions of men that had propped up in order to make particularly the leadership feel ever so righteous, and to postulate on street corners in whitewashed robes, preaching and praying before the people and raising their eyes heavenward. It is this disconnect from what ultimately was the truth of God, and it was a movement into things that were man-made. It was an elevation of human tradition and the machinations of mortal minds that had ensnared in part the minds of the Jewish people, and indeed of a portion of the audience before whom he is speaking in this text. And so when we ponder the idea of truth, what do we think? Truth in the Greek is just a fascinating word. It's almost like God planned to come into the world when Greek was the lingua franca of the known world at the time. Because what we find in that Greek word, aletheia, is something that's most fascinating when we ponder it then and translate it into English. You see, we of course can translate it truth. A more direct meaning would be undisclosedness or unhiddenness. The unhiddenness shall set you free. That which is not hidden, that which is not concealed, shall set you free. We could go so deep into the actual history of the word, how it pertains to Greek mythology and how that then relates to the audience before whom Jesus was speaking. But anyone who understood Greek in any depth in that time would have conjured a certain image in their mind when they heard that the truth will set you free. Of course, Jesus could have said that there are many different things that could have set you free, but he particularly chose the word truth. And whilst that might seem innocuous to us in English, it was indeed something quite striking and powerful when heard in the Greek. The reason being is because the word aletheia is a lot like the word atheist, theos meaning God, and the prefix a meaning no or without. So of course the term atheist means without God or no God. Someone who claims that there is no God. Aletheia, lethe meaning hidden, concealed, unseen, with the prefix a meaning that it's not, therefore. Indeed, you could say that the revelation shall set you free. Now, when you think about the word revelation, which is a pretty accurate translation into English, at least from a conceptual standpoint, we begin to see what this might be pertaining to. The revelation, that which has been revealed, shall set you free. Now we're getting somewhere. Because when we think about the one who is saying these words, we should be able to begin to see in our minds exactly what is being said here. That the revelation shall set you free. Of course, when we consider revelation, we often think, perhaps to your mind comes the book of Revelation, singular. You might also consider just generally that Scripture is revelation. And this is something that's vitally important to us. The notion that the truth of God has been manifest in two ways. One, of course, which I know John Buckle has preached on before, is that through general revelation, through that which has been made and manifested in the world, the creation stands as a testament to the power of its creator. The hundreds of billions of galaxies and the hundreds of billions of stars that fill them. And the wonder that we find when we look up to the heavens on a starry night sky. We see that the creation testifies to the power of the Creator. But more importantly for us, we see that the specifics of who this Creator is and what He has done in the world throughout history is revealed to us in the Scriptures. Holy men of God spoke as the Holy Spirit moved them. We see many authors down throughout what amounts to over 1,500 years of history, writing many different forms of literature, most of which, of course, is historical narrative, describing the many ways in which this God and this Creator moved throughout the world and acted through his people Israel. It has been revealed to us. So of course, when we consider the truth that that which is not hidden, that which is revealed shall set you free, we can of course apply this and think immediately, of course, of the Scriptures. That the truth and that which is contained within the Scriptures, the revelation, shall set you free. There's even a deeper level to this. Because indeed that word aletheia has a double entendre for us in store. Namely, that not only is it talking about the revealed word from the mouth, from the pen, on paper or through the air, but it is of course a reference to the very one who is the embodiment of the revelation of God, namely Jesus himself. How does the beginning of John chapter 1 read? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. When John then continues in his prologue through to verse 14, we find that the Word became sarx, flesh, and eskenosin, dwelt among us. Even that word dwelt, eskenosin, in the Greek, means in its root form to pitch one's tent, to tabernacle. And so this word, this logos, a word that we've explored here before, this logos, which in the mind of the Stoics, who were the predominant philosophers of the day in Jesus' time in the first century, the logos being the underpinning of all that is reality, the thing, the foundation of the universe, the phenomenon that holds all things together. In Stoicism, this logos is being applied as a term, as a concept, to a person, namely Jesus, who is God. And that this logos, this God, this underpinning force and phenomenon in reality, became flesh like us, and then made a tabernacle among us, just as the glory of God had in the tabernacle of old. With Jesus himself being so evidently demonstrated to be the very personification of God, as presented in human flesh, are you beginning to see how this revelation shall set you free? Because indeed he is not speaking just of ethereal concepts. He is not just engaging in wordplay, nor is he simply engaging in wax philosophy. He is of course speaking on that level. He is of course speaking on a very deep conceptual level. But in a fascinating manner, he is also speaking namely to himself and of himself. That the truth of what I'm saying shall set you free, because I will set you free. The aletheia, the unhiddenness, the thing that has been revealed, the revelation, is both word and person. It is both the tongue and the hand. Because of course we think about how this works pragmatically. We think that with evangelism, of course, we are communicating the gospel message, the good news. But of course, what is that good news of, in substance? It is the good news of a particular person who did a particular thing at a particular time in history. When you boil it down to the concise, more immediate and pertinent details. The good news is the fact that God came into human flesh, combining the divine with the mortal, and that he lived in perfect obedience to the law, sinlessly, in the manner in which we cannot do. And then in that state of lawful perfection, he then died not just a physical death, but also a spiritual one, wherein he takes upon himself the sins and punishment of his people. a story of a person doing real things in the real world. The aletheia is not just a concept. The truth is not just a concept. The truth is also a person. And when we consider what he's referring to here, that he's not only referring to concepts and ideas, but also referring to personhood, we can think about other passages and the impact that might have when Jesus says that, amongst the other three, I am the truth, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, and that no one comes to the Father but through me. I am the revelation. And even that little chain that we have there in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Namely that I am the way towards what, of course, the Father. What is that way defined by? The truth. Namely what I've done. What does that bring about? Life. In opposition of death, bondage, slavery. And that no one comes to the Father unless you take that way of truth which heads towards life. The depth of what's being spoken of here is just so often glanced over when we contemplate it at a very rudimentary level. When we think about, oh, the truth will set you free, it sounds like a nice saying. The philosophical, the historical, the metaphysical, the theological depth that is being said in an otherwise terse statement like the truth shall set you free almost cannot be comprehended. If indeed this kind of statement is able to be made, what ramifications might that have for us in this world? Well, of course, the broader applications are so myriad that we would not have time to discuss them this morning, nor would you want me to trail on for that long. But there are a few key ones that are of most immediate priority and concern. Of course, when we think about how this relates, especially even to the context of slavery that Jesus is talking about here. Indeed, this language relating to slavery and bondage, the truth shall eleuthero, it shall set you free. It shall release you from slavery. And eleutheros was a designation for one who was a slave, especially from birth. It was a title, an adjective, if you would. It was a descriptor of the one who was a slave. But here he is saying that he will set you free from this bondage. That these chains will break because in this case of the truth, namely him and what he has done for us. When we think about how this relates to the standing of our soul before the judgment seat of God, we should of course tremble if we are still held in bondage, because this is a mightily fearful thing. But indeed, to the one whose chains have been broken, to the one whose cage has been opened, to the one who has been set free, the notion that the truth has indeed set us free should bring a depth of appreciation and sheer awe that is probably easy to miss for us as 21st century Westerners. People who, yes, may have lived difficult lives, but who have, by historical accounts, lived incredibly privileged lives and well-off lives. So we, of course, have a duty to be able to appreciate the depth of what's being said here. And of course, you can perhaps imagine the joy that these words will bring for people who have actually indeed been freed from physical slavery, or even in greater depth for those who remain in said slavery. I wonder what these words might mean to our Christian brothers and sisters in Pyongyang, in West China, in so many other places around the world. I wonder what that might mean for them. People who do indeed reside in political and physical slavery, but indeed are hearing the words that you have actually been set free. Perhaps when you think of it from their perspective, you might begin to appreciate in greater depth the words being spoken here. But of course, even on a deeper level, these words that the truth will set you free, in this relation of truth and the slavery of the mind and the will, speak to things even beyond ourselves. They speak namely to the danger of a lack of conformity with the truth, and the danger specifically of being in bondage mentally and spiritually to sin and to that rebellious state of nature. So many of the problems that we see in our world are a result, one way or another, of the practical outworkings of being in disalignment with the truth, of being disjoined, disconnected from the truth. Because of course this statement, if anything else, is a statement of objectivity. It's an absolute statement that the truth will set you free. Of course, this is amplified in that chain I spoke of earlier with regards to John 14:6, that I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. It's not I am a, it is I am the, definite article. Not myself and Muhammad, not myself and Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, not myself or anyone else, not myself and a political leader, nor a king, nor an emperor. I am the way, I am the truth, I am life. Now in the 21st century West, such objective statements are not exactly the flavour of the day, are they? We reside in a time where postmodern philosophy has developed now for about a century and has really taken hold in the last 30 years. This postmodernism, which we've spoken of before, that rejects absolute truth, that rejects societal structure, that rejects normality in any given sense, that is critical and indeed hypercritical of just about everything under the sun. That at a base and somewhat oversimplified level proclaims that there is no truth but that which you decide for yourself, that which you surmise in your own mind. It looks at the modernist movement of the Enlightenment and the elevation of humanity through humanism. It looks at how that peaked in the 20th century, and what it sees is 2 world wars and hundreds of millions of people dead in pursuit of the master race and in the pursuit of the perfection of humanity, as we saw in the Third Reich. And it says, well, if human beings can't elevate themselves to the pinnacle and cannot achieve ultimate truth, then I suppose there is no truth. Of course, they fail to forget that there were ideas before that. There are thousands of years of human history, particularly Christian history, that had a lot better ideas than that which was tried to implement in the 20th century. But nevertheless, here we find ourselves in 2020, where most people, not all, but most people in my age bracket, sort of millennial and certainly Generation Z, would be taken aback at the idea that truth is objective, that truth is an absolute. Because it's all about you. You need to determine your destiny. You can achieve anything. Who are you to tell me how I should dress, how I should walk, how I should talk, how I should wear my hair, how I should do anything? I identify as what I identify, and if that happens to be something which I'm not, well, who cares? Because I identify as what I identify. Because there is no objective truth, there is no ultimate standard, but that which is formulated in human minds. This is a terribly dangerous state for a society to find itself in. Because when a society abandons the concept of a standard of truth that resides outside of itself, there will be no limits. There will be no boundaries. There will be no place that it will not go. All things will be permissible because nothing is not permissible. Because not only does humanity not set the bounds, there simply are no bounds. A horrifically doomed state of affairs if there ever was one. When we think about how those words, that the truth shall set you free, and therefore its importance with regards to an actual conformity to that truth, because of course we see here that Jesus in this immediate context of verses 31 and 32 is speaking to who? Those who already believe, if you look at verse 31. That the truth will set you free. But he's of course at the same time, as we saw, interacting with those who do not believe, who indeed after years of him having spoken to them still raise the most ludicrous question of, who are you? As if they don't know already. Because of course they do. They do. But they're not willing to accept it, are they? They refuse to believe. They refuse to hear what is being spoken before them. They refuse to see the signs and wonders that were given as a testament to the words that were being spoken, and they refuse to accept that this is their Messiah. Utterly refuse. And indeed we see by the time of the Passion Week and indeed the crucifixion itself, there is all but what? Two people. John, Mother Mary. Even his own disciples didn't have the guts to come out. But indeed the entire city, people who had gathered in droves all but a week ago for the triumphal entry, were the very same crowd turning around and calling for his unjust execution. They refused to believe. They refused to conform themselves with the truth. It is a dangerous thing when human beings refuse to conform with the truth. Refuse to conform, in this case specifically, considering the meaning that we've explored with regards to the word truth, to conform to that of Jesus. Not just his example, not just his teachings, but indeed his divine, righteous rule. Ultimately, it is a refusal to submit. It is a refusal to bow down and to accept the just and right kingship of the Lord Jesus. It's rebellion in the ranks. And rebellion does not end well. Not in this case. A refusal to conform to the truth has so many ramifications in personal life. Even considering in your own life, perhaps. Have you ever pondered, in a moment of silence, am I living in accordance with the truth? Am I living in accordance with reality, with the world as it is, in actuality, not just in how I want the world to be or how I believe it should be? If half the people in our society asked that question, we would be in a lot better place. Is my life in conformity to the truth? Now, of course, when we do that, we should find out quite quickly if we're engaging authentically. But the answer is that there are certain portions of our life that indeed are not. And that is, of course, okay, because that is what it means to be human. But indeed, that is what is part of being a Christian, whereby we are continuing to be sanctified, where we've been taken out of this state of mental and spiritual enslavement. We've been freed, but yet still carried with us an element of that enslavement, staying the mark of that enslavement. Now, of course, it is incumbent upon the power of God working in us to be able to move away further and further from that state of enslavement and that bondage of the will, to use Martin Luther's terminology. But we often have to consider, are we in conformity with the truth? We have to be humble. We have to submit. We have to be honest with God. We've seen from Pastor Steve's series the importance of being honest in prayer, the importance of being honest with God, admitting our faults, committing to working on them, not to achieve some holier-than-thou state of perfection because we will die trying, but rather to continue to be faithful and honest ambassadors of a kingdom that is not of this world, under the authority of a king that is not of this world. And we should be, if anyone should be in our society, we should be people who uphold the banner of truth, who stand and plant a flag upon the hill for truth, who will refuse to accept compromise, who will refuse to accept half-truths and half-lies, who refuse to accept a sliding off into oblivion, who refuse to simply go with the flow in order to remain popular or likeable or maintain some sense of public image. Because you can only hold on to that for so long before you realise its futility. The futility of trying to remain cool. And indeed, I know so many churches doing that this very morning. Putting on a show to be cool, to attract people with the bright lights and the smoke machines and the cool music. Meanwhile, ignoring the fact that what you bring them in with is what you shall keep them with. And if it is not the gospel, you're in for a bad time. A lack of conformity to the truth is devastating for the human mind, as it is for the human soul. It is devastating, of course, not just from an eternal perspective with regards to judgment, but it is, of course, devastating in this world. When I was looking at this passage and considering this from a historical and theological perspective, I was reminded almost immediately, for whatever reason, of the devastating nuclear cataclysm that occurred at Chernobyl. Now, there are a multitude of reasons why Chernobyl went wrong, the least of which was just general communist substandards that occur when you literally and figuratively kill off your competition. But what was at the depth of what went wrong at Chernobyl was just a sheer refusal on behalf of the high command of the Soviet Union to accept what was going on. An outright refusal. They would not accept that this was the reality with which they were facing. So, of course, when Chernobyl detonated, as it did, and again there are a multitude of scientific reasons why that occurred, the immediate response was to send in the fire brigade. Now, for anyone with even a rudimentary understanding of nuclear physics, trying to put out a nuclear fire with some water doesn't exactly work. It's kind of like literally and figuratively trying to put out the sun with a sprinkler. Now, of course, they continued to send in the fire brigade, not because they were misunderstanding what was going on, but rather because if they sent in anyone else but the fire brigade, people would ask questions. So, of course, you send in the fire brigade for a nuclear silo, which is literally spewing the core of the sun into the atmosphere. And within minutes, of course, you had men whose skin was going red, whose hands were practically melting off. But of course, silence. Now, why would this occur? Well, as kind of Chernobyl unfolded and was just made progressively worse by the fact that the actual solutions to the problem were not being done, because then that would actually confirm in the world's eyes that indeed the Soviet Union had had a nuclear catastrophe. They continued to do various propagandistic ploys, things which were never going to work and they knew wouldn't work, but would give the image that this is just an explosion, it's just a fire, we'll put it out in a drum at all. Even to the point where at one stage, the commander of the nuclear program, when asked by his inferiors who knew what was going on, who knew that the core of the sun was billowing into the world around them, the official response from the leadership of the Soviet Union was that Nuclear catastrophes do not happen in the Soviet Union. Therefore, the answer must be something else, mustn't it, comrade? Can't be a nuclear catastrophe, because nuclear catastrophes did not happen in the Soviet Union. Therefore, find an answer to something else, comrade. A refusal to conform with the truth, a refusal to conform with reality. And of course, many of you will remember the fallout, pardon the pun, of Chernobyl. A refusal to conform with the truth brings about devastating consequences, not just in judgment, but also in this world. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us, as supposed people of the truth, the ones who follow that way of truth that leads to life, to indeed be faithful servants to that truth, both the conceptual component of the truth, as well as the one who embodies that truth, the Logos, Jesus the Christ. In order for the truth to set you free, there must be a conformity to that truth. It is a conformity, of course, which begins with the action of God. But it is nevertheless an element, in part, incumbent upon us to remain conformed to that truth. With his power, with his assistance, with his help, with his guiding. We must remain in the truth, and we must remain faithful to the truth. We must always preach the truth. We must always live the truth. For indeed, this is the way in which the truth, the aletheia, the revelation, the one who is the revelation, shall set you